Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, I just wanted to give you an update on my trip to Guatemala. It was profound and it was fun and I had a great time. And I just wanted to give a thank you to Simply Snacking and Sue. Just everyone loved it there. You know, I brought some snacks with me and packed them easily in my suitcase like you've been hearing me ramble about. But really, the joy that it brought people, they loved it. And I knew I was giving them some nutrition and they were really enjoying it. So I made a lot of friends thanks to Simply Snacking in Guatemala. And just wanted to give a shout out to Sue for making this possible, for sponsoring the podcast, and for providing a product that I can believe in that can help people. As a matter of fact, as an update, one of my patients who works for a big tech company said that they gave him responsibility for the break room, and now he has Simply Snacking and some very healthy low carb options for employees because everyone noticed they were gaining weight and feeling terrible and not as productive. So this is what our message is. I think we have a shared vision. I think, bringing healthy food to people and healthy lifestyle and helping people to cope in times of difficulty. So again, Simply Snacking, thank you for sponsoring us here. Thank you for helping me to get these messages out. And there's so many great ones coming that I'm excited about, but we greatly appreciate your support. And thank you for making a product that we can stand behind and really believe in, and I can pack lightly and take it with me wherever I go. So thank you very much. Have a great day. And thank you for listening to this episode. Hello and welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. This is a fun one for me here. This is someone I've known over the years. We kind of crossed paths. We've been in little small groups together. This is a physical therapist, a deep thinker, an author, someone who is very intriguing to me. So I wanted to have him come on, and I've read one of his stories so far, and it's just pretty remarkable how stories. And I think being a storyteller and sharing and these are such important qualities that some of us have missed out on too much. I think part of it is people aren't reading bedtime stories to their kids anymore. They're too busy, they're too stressed, and I think these are things that we've lost as a family, as a society. So Charles Solorio, welcome. Good to have you.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah.
People would be bored just hearing me talk. They've been stuck with me a couple of times by myself. So tell people your story, like your upbringing, your background, and what got you to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I want to just let you know that I really admire your podcast. I am definitely a connoisseur of podcasts, and I have listened to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different podcasts. Big fan, and I love yours. I love the positivity. And I love your intro, your music, and what you say, and the no gloves. I just think it's awesome. So I love your intro.
Appreciate it.
It's actually one of my favorite intros of all the different.
Well, Jack will be my editor. He did the music and did all this. So I go, here's what I want, and he kept just doing stuff until I go, I like that. I think this do it. And I just kind of came up with the catchphrase thing. I just liked it too because I think so many times we the medical society, the community has become so sterile, and it's not about family and loving that person. It's just like a conveyor belt. So I think a lot of people feel that way. And I think these stories, we can't tell these stories I can, because I have a different practice, but a lot of people can't tell these stories in a way where, they have 5 minutes with a patient. They're trying to figure out what the health problem is, So no, I appreciate that. So welcome. Tell us your story, man.
Yeah, so I guess where I'm at in the story right now in my life is I am very much in the realization that I am in a student mode. So I am learning. I am trying to actively learn what I'm supposed to learn. And I do sense that I am being taught different things. And I think we can all state that in our various stages of our stories. With me personally, kind of give a little bit of background information. I grew up with two loving parents, a mom and a dad who loved each other, loved me and my sister, grew up with an awesome sister. So family life right there. I don't take that for granted that I was blessed with a good, solid, uh, healthy family life dynamics and family dynamics. I grew up with a great diversity of friends, a good cross section of just about every ethnicity and culture. Grew up in good schools. I grew up, and here I'm going to age myself here. I grew up in the shadow of the Vietnam War, playing out on the evening news every evening. My parents were always with the TV, the news on. So I grew up with, the politics and the topics of the day in the 60s. And I was a little kid, but I soaked that up. And at the time, I didn't understand why my parents had such a personal interest in the Vietnam War. And then later I find out, as I got a little bit older, that my cousin was fighting in Vietnam, fighting communism. And unfortunately, we lost my cousin in the war. And I vividly still remember the funeral, and I remember the profound effect that it had on my mom, as that was her sister's boy, um, and um, and the profound effect that it had on my extended family. So I kind of grew up with the shadow of that. I gradually learned to love stories and just devoured books. I loved to read books as a little kid. Kids books, older kids books. I loved fiction. I loved stories. Um, I gradually transitioned to a love of sports. So I loved learning uh, the stories of all of my favorite athletes. I grew up a big Orioles fan, and by the way, I'm still an Orioles fan. As despite how bad they are right now, hey, look at them. I'm telling you, sports fans out there, keep an eye on my Baltimore Orioles. About 2023, 2024, kind of look out for them. So I grew up an Orioles, Lakers, Rams fan before I came to the San Diego area. And loved sports, gradually went into physical therapy and graduated and became a physical therapist. Again, I loved engaging in stories, and I looked at each patient's condition as, okay, let's work together and find out what the grand reveal, is to find out what's causing your pain. Uh, and so I'm in an interesting phase in my career right now where I think I'm transitioning from physical therapy a little bit more now, transitioning into more writing. So I'm kind of going full circle back to where I used to love to write and read, and it's coming full circle. And now, decades later, I'm returning back to my original roots. And all of this to say is, even today, I still am so blessed. I have a great, loving, supportive wife. I have great kids, adult kids. I love seeing where their stories are taking them in their individual paths. I have a great work situation. I have a great boss, great coworkers, great friends. I have so much that I am truly blessed and grateful for. But I've always had and struggled slightly with a bit of sadness kind of in the background, even in the midst of all these blessings and all these great things, great people around me. I have wrestled somewhat with just this background sadness. I kind of look at it as like I'm living life, and in the background, the soundtrack music is kind of low at times. Sometimes the volume's a little bit higher, but it's a low volume, kind of somber, melancholy music song in the background. And I think there's this sense of, as I look at our culture, at all the stories around me, this sense of we are lost. Something is broken. Something's not right in the world. And I have access to so many lives with broken stories. I see that in the physical therapy clinic with friends, family, who isn't aware of how things seem to be off? Something's wrong as we listen and watch the news. And so here's my pitch. This is kind of where I'm at and trying to figure out how do we navigate through this, through the blessings and the joys, but I know I'm not the only one that has this background somber kind of melancholy song in the background. There's this element of sadness that we live in this life, despite all the joys that goes with that. So here's my pitch. And my pitch is, I navigate through life with stories, and so do you. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, is in my personal story, I'm learning, how do we do that? How do we navigate and how do we find our way? This sense of that we're lost, something's not right, something's broken, something's off. And then realizing that we love and live stories. Like I have had, books that I've read that have had a tremendous effect on me. And we all have our favorite movies. And I don't know, Brian, if you can name off, any movies off the top of your head, or any stories, books you've read that have had, some sort of impact on you. No, not just like, I mean, we all love the stories and the movies that entertain us and we're entertained, but I'm talking about like another layer of depth, something that, no, it had some sort of a more profound effect. I don't know if you have any off the top of your head.
Yeah, there's so many. Most recently, I listened to an audiobook. It was called The Higher Calling, or The Higher Call, I think. And it was just amazing. They were talking about the German um, uh, pilots and the American pilots, and how there was a mutual respect there. Even though they were trying to kill each other, there was a mutual respect. And one of the stories out of that book is just so fascinating to me, and it just shows these guys who were trying to kill each other in the war. One of the guys who happened to be an American was in a crippled plane, and he was just, he was flying on one engine. It was shot to heck, and he had just bombed this other German's town.
Gee.
And so the German jumped in they ordered him to shoot down the guy, and the American pilot's name was Charlie Brown, of all things, right? But anyways, he went up there to shoot him down. He looked at the guy and goes, this is not right. I can't just shoot down a crippled plane. So anyways, he didn't shoot him down. And the guy always wondered why he didn't. He saluted him and pointed him in the right direction and let him go. And so the guy always wondered, why in the heck didn't that guy shoot me down? And then they became friends after the war, and they realized, like, they talked about, what they went through in pilot and how similar they were, and they were trying to kill each other still, right? And he said, if you would have been in a able-bodied plane, I would have shot you down, right? So there was a honor. They had a sense of honor still, and he was told, you don't shoot down crippled planes, you don't shoot people in parachutes coming down. And there was an integrity in war, which is so ironic to me. You think is the purpose was just to kill, and they were saying, we were trying to kill the plane so they couldn't kill our people. We weren't trying to kill the pilots, because we know that there was a respect. That was just interesting.
Wow.
Idea.
Wow.
Anyways, that. And on a more simple note, stuff like Rocky, these kind of stories where you have the underdog who comes out, David and Goliath, those kind of stories where it's like, where you have leadership, where people step up, and, in those types of times of battle, like Gladiator, those kind of guy movies, where you say, oh, all the odds were against them, and they stood up and they did these things, like Lone Survivor, those kind of stories, like how do you survive, and how do you have kindness of people helping you along the way, and all those things. I love those kind of stories where there's some kind of message to it, not just blowing up cars and, there's no point to it. When you realize, wow, that was the point of the story, it's really profound.
Awesome.
Sometimes I just like to laugh, right? Or you have a story that just is silly or whatever, and take your mind off stuff. So that's why storytelling is so amazing, because it could take you to a different world and a, different place.
Absolutely. And I totally resonate with everything you just said. And I love those. I do. I love those times where I'm just sitting down and I just want to be entertained, and then other times, no, I want something really meaty. I want something really that affects me, that I experience, that will challenge how I see things. I love to be challenged. And so I want to see a movie or read a book that challenges how I'm kind of through my point of view. I want my point of view challenged at times. And so, like movies that have resonated with me is, I kind of grew up as a kid as a real Civil War, I mean, I just really wanted to know everything about the Civil War. So the movie Glory really affected me. Of course, Lord of the Rings, all of the movies, the books, and I loved Seabiscuit and Bridge of Spies, Tom Hanks movie. And these are all movies that really kind of affected how I look at things and how I kind of make sense and navigate things. And it reminds me that we are composing our own stories, so to speak, on a almost minute by minute basis, a daily basis. For example, like you've already been in the process of composing, writing a story about me. In your head, you've got this story of me where different things, and there's other things you have no idea. You don't have the data and the plot points for that story, but you have a basic idea of who I am in your eyes. And I've done the same thing with you. And even we are navigating through our stories right now. I know enough about your story, you know enough about my story, where we know we can have this conversation, and we know that we can explore different topics. And so it is with relationships in general, with your wife, I have my story about my wife, and you've acquired different experiences and different events and different feelings over the year, and you've put together a story in your head about your wife. And that helps you navigate in your relationship with your wife. And she's done the same thing with you. That's how she makes sense out of you. And same thing with me and my wife. We have our different elements of story that we've kind of put in different plot points. And hopefully, and this is the tricky part in navigating with stories, is, well, are our stories accurate? Are they based in reality? Because you may, or I may be composing a story about you that isn't entirely accurate, and that could get in the way. So there's this delicate balance of acquiring and putting together the plot points, so to speak, or the backstory, but at the same time having that balance of, yes, using that to help me navigate, but at the same time, not holding so tightly to everything, that I need to be open to new information that changes that story that I'm putting together in my head. And I think we do that even in other aspects of our lives. How about politics? I mean, you and I, we probably agree on some things, and there's probably some things that we don't agree. But you, in your years of life, you've been putting together a story about different political topics, different political leaders, even coworkers, even your patients, my patients. Every patient that I see, there's a story with that patient that I'm putting together in my brain, and hopefully it's accurate. And I'm putting together this story to help me understand each individual patient, because one story doesn't fit with every single patient. And so every patient, every person has a different, unique story. And I'm trying my best in my brain, putting the parts of it together to help me navigate and relate to that person, and knowing certain topics that I know that person really has a passion for, and I know that's a great conversation starter. And maybe there's other topics where I just don't want to go down that road with that particular person.
Yeah, that's wisdom. That's wisdom, because look, I'm not going to argue with you about what to eat or what to sleep if you believe really strongly one way. So that's why, and it's great you're saying that, because this podcast, one of the people are sitting on the fence saying, is there more to life? Is there more to this stuff? I think we have data to say, yes, there's a lot of stuff that we can't explain. There's a lot of things where our outlook on life is going to affect our health, is going to affect our mental state, right? All those things. Like I always tell patients when they're tired all the time, I said, when is if you had a trip to Hawaii, all expenses paid, wherever you want to go in the world, do you think you have more energy to do that? Right. And if they're miserable at their job, they're working the field all day, they're like, oh no, I don't want to do that. But when you have something that you're passionate about, like even now I work more hours than I would like to probably, but I love it. I have a passion for it and I enjoy it. It's not like what you do with physical therapy, because I know you're bonding with patients, you're helping them at their most needy time. And their healers have that they get a reward. Now, not everyone. There's people who make you, they say, why am I doing this job? I've lost my mind. But then you wait for that other person who can really, really have an impact on, and your story can really, really impact, right? And I think the other thing I like that you're raising is that we're all going to have a different perspective. We all know this. I have friends where someone, for instance, Tro on my podcast, he's one of the nicest guys on earth, but some people, the perspective they have of him is all the bad qualities, right? So if you're of one political party, you're going to look at the other political leader and find all the bad qualities when you write their story.
Yep.
And your person, you're going to write all the good qualities and forget all the bad stuff that they did. And I see that over and over. We're all human beings. At some point we say, okay, they're not perfect. I'm not, no one's perfect, obviously, right? So then we figure out, how do I fit into this? How do I navigate life in a way where I can be a positive influence? Not everyone's going to agree with me, and that's okay. And you and I are not going to agree. That doesn't make you a bad guy or me a bad guy. But I think in society, we've turned it to a point where, oh, they don't agree with me, then they're a bad person, right? A black and white issue, literally black and white issues, where some people hate white people just because of their color of their skin, and some people hate black people just because of the color of their skin. I'm like, well, give me the opportunity to be a jerk and see it. Then, give me a minute to see if I'm a jerk or not before you hate me, at least, and I'll do the same for you. How's that?
Yeah. And how many times in our lives we're without even fully realizing it, we've been putting together this story about this certain person, and we have this negative point of view about this person, and maybe circumstances just put us together in some way. Or maybe I have this person in class and now this person sits right next to me, or some other unique circumstance where I'm actually able to get to know this person. And all of a sudden, if we're intellectually honest, we should revise our story, is that, I totally had the wrong story about you. I totally misread you. And how many times have I done that in my life? And I wouldn't be surprised if you would say the same thing. Well, we start off with this narrative about this person or this group of people. And once we get to know their story, and all of a sudden things are different, and all of a sudden I have a different perspective. Something flips a switch in my brain, and all of a sudden things are different, and I look at this person differently. And I think people respond to that. It's almost like I think of it like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I make up this narrative about this person because this person's, bad in some fashion, and then I only look for selectively putting together pieces of evidence to back up my viewpoint, and then it takes someone to come and change that viewpoint. And that's powerful when one is able to be honest and look back and say, wait a minute, I put together a wrong story on this person. This person surprised me. This person is different than what I was putting together.
Or a place. I've been to some of the worst places on earth. El Salvador, some of the roughest neighborhoods. I found kind, decent people everywhere I've been. I found bad people there too, don't doubt. We have bodyguards, right? We have people there to protect us. But you realize, like, so many people, you hear their story and they care and they love their community. What they're doing is self-sacrificing and reaching out. So it's one of those things where we always say, oh, that state's terrible. Well, there's a lot of good people in that state or in that city, in that town. There's people of faith who step up and they help people when there's a flood. And I think when you look at the story, you step back, and that's one of the things I know we've both been concerned about. You look at society, because when New York was bombed on 9/11, everyone was helping each other. Everyone came together. Everyone was digging through rubble. They didn't say, what color are you? What sexual preference do you have? What religion are you? They said, there's another human being I'm going to save. But from that, we become so divided. And I think an important thing is looking at history, the story. Like if you look at the story of Nazi Germany, what they did is they dehumanize people. They turn them into animals. They made them the scapegoat. You made them people that are the undesirables. And you say, hey, if we just get rid of them, everything will be fine. And they're not the problem. Now we're doing the same thing with police officers. We're doing the same thing with people who aren't vaccinated or are vaccinated. And so what's happened is we've found ways to divide ourselves in ways that have never been done before. But I think once you dehumanize someone and you're not willing to listen, we're in a really, really dangerous spot, because whether you and I agree, because, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example for me. On low carb MD, I've been talking about low carb. I've seen the benefits of my patient. I've seen people get better. I've seen their health come back. I've seen diabetes resolve, blood pressure get better, depression, anxiety, stress, all these things get better. I've seen it. I've been a part of that. And then I started talking about faith. And people reached out to me and said, hey, doc, don't talk about faith. We don't want to hear you talk about faith. We want to hear you talk about low carb. Well, that's part of me. What do you want me to do? I mean, I can't. So that's why I started this podcast, to say, let's talk about those things, because I know that you could have the best diet on the world and exercise, but if you're not sleeping, you're stressed, you hate the world, and hold on to resentment. I've seen the destruction that comes from that. So as a doctor, I have to look at the whole thing. I can't just look at diet and say, okay, let's not talk about anything else. I'm not going to talk about, you got hit by a car and you have a broken leg or whatever. So I think when you start stepping back, you think, well, there's a bigger picture. And I think for you saying there's a bigger story that we're missing somehow as a society, we're off track, and none of us really know how to put it back onto the track.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. and even just further kind of teasing out the story structure, even is there are in every great story, there are various components of a story. There is a certain order and structure that a good story has. For example, I'm a big subscriber to the idea of the 3-act structure. And so as an author and learning to write, the 3-act structure for me is crucial to understand. And basically, the 3-act structure, of course, some of the listeners already know all the information I'm going to mention in the next few minutes, and maybe others, this is brand new. But 3-act structure is basically every great story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you can really nerd out on structure of stories. And you could nerd out on some of the different components of the components. But in a 3-act structure, basically, the first 25% or so of the story is the beginning. The next 50% is the middle section of the story, the second act. And then the third act, the last 25% or so, is the third act. So we can even further break that down. Let's say I live to the age of 80, and then I move on after that. So approximately the first 20 years of my life is the beginning, the first act. The second act is, the next 40 years. And then the third act is the final act, is my last 20 years. And there's so much that is divided up in threes. Three I would argue, is like a divine number, but there are so many things in our lives that we live out that are divided up into three. You have morning, breakfast, dinner, you sleep, you do your day, you go to bed. Even taking a good photograph, the rule of thirds, and so there are so many threes, sets of three in our basic lives. Another important component is point of view. This is one of the most important elements from an author's perspective, is as the author is putting together a story, one of the most important components to settle early on is, okay, through whose eyes do I want the reader to see the story? Who is the main point of view in the story? Absolutely crucial. The results of that decision by the author will determine so much about the rest of the story. Every story, you have a protagonist, you have a main character. You gotta have that that drama and conflict. So you have to have an antagonist, someone who opposes, or it could be the environment. Something opposes the protagonist. Another part is you have an inciting incident. So the inciting incident is defined as it usually occurs with the protagonist. The main character is living their life a certain way, and they have a certain equilibrium in their life, and then something happens that changes the trajectory of their life afterwards. Maybe you could argue, like in the Lord of the Rings, the inciting incident for the story is when Frodo finds out he has the ring and Gandalf has told him what that ring is and what it represents. And that is the inciting incident, because it changes the trajectory of Frodo and the rest of his life and the story. It kicks off and it's a new trajectory. And every story has a resolution. You want to resolve the questions brought up during the story. And then what is the basic message of the story? You just talked about, certain things that have a certain message, and that is absolutely crucial to having that deep, meaningful story. Is what is the message? And so, kind of dovetailing a little bit on what you were talking about, I want to emphasize a little bit something that I've been learning, and that I think is of crucial importance. Point of view. The point of view is so important in a story. Let's say, for example, let's use the Lord of the Rings as an example again. And let's say I, as a viewer watching the movies, or a reader reading the books, and I decide I'm going to randomly just make up my own point of view. I want to see the Lord of the Rings. I'm going to make the Lord of the Rings only through the narrow point of view of an orc. And if I choose to adopt that point of view, I'm going to miss out on all the backstory, all the other parts of the story. I'm not going to know anything about Frodo and his story, Gandalf, Samwise. I'm not going to know about any of that if I only view the Lord of the Rings through the point of view of an orc. All I know is I need to kill those little guys, and my boss is after me to kill for him. And that's all I know. And with that limited point of view, that's all I know. Now, can I adopt that point of view and still call it the Lord of the Rings? I can't do that. I can't hijack Tolkien's story and make it my own and still call it the Lord of the Rings. Why? Because that wasn't the author's intent. The author's intent wasn't for me to adopt the point of view of a single orc. That wasn't the author's intent. So the point of view is absolutely crucial in understanding the fullness of the story. So we can read about stories, we can watch movies, we can live these stories, we can compose our own stories. But here's the plot twist. We actually are in a story. And this is the bigger story that you just alluded to. And there's a bigger story that is beyond our narrow point of view. And there's a bigger, more epic story that we are all in. And that is a profound change in point of view. And that is what I'm trying to learn and trying to share through my writing, is that point of view is absolutely crucial to understanding the story that we live in. If we stay stuck in our narrow point of view, we are going to miss out on the bigger story that we actually dwell in. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a huge point, because that's what I try to do in my life. I say, let me step back. You don't like certain groups of people. Why is that? And I could sit down with someone and ask them that. I've heard great stories along those lines of people. One of my favorite guys was a African American preacher, and the Klan tried everything to destroy this guy, and all he did was love them back. And it was like they're telling the story, like he changed us, because all the hatred, we tried to scare him, we tried to make him miserable, we tried to do all this stuff, and he just loved them back and laughed. Like they would call and like harass him and say, hey, you know who this is? And the guy said, oh, Tommy, thanks for calling, so nice to hear from you. And it's like they didn't know what to say. Everything they did, they lit a cross on his lawn, and he said, hey, you guys are having a barbecue? I didn't know. Let me go and get some hot dogs for you guys. And, like, everything they tried to do to hate them, he just loved them back. And they said, we just can't deal with this guy anymore, right? Because he just killed them with kindness. Now, obviously, that doesn't work in all situations, and there's
Sure.
but it was one of those points of views where he just said, look, guys, you guys don't get it. I'm a nice guy, and I'm decent. And so ultimately, they were telling the story that he was in the restaurant with his family, and they surrounded him, tried to intimidate him in the restaurant. And he said, whatever you do to that chicken, we're going to do to you. So he picked up and kissed the chicken, right? And he said, who's first? And they didn't know what to do, right? So anyways, those kind of stories where someone had the integrity and the power and the love just to say, okay, look, I'm not just going to feed into your hate. But I think when you sit down with someone and you talk to them reasonably, even if you don't agree, from a different political party, a different religion, say, what's good about your religion? What makes you believe that? And here's what I believe, and here's why I believe what I believe. Doesn't mean one of us, we have to hate each other and not, get along. But I think what we have to do, like you're saying, this story is finding the common ground, because maybe I'm an Orioles fan. We disagree on everything else in the world except we can go root and high five each other there. But everywhere else we would be in conflict. And I see that there's people I agree with completely with low carb, but I don't agree with their politics, or I don't agree with how they feel on. But I still like they're a person. They're a nice person, and they're trying to do what they think is right. So I think being able to look from other perspectives, then you get the bigger story. And sometimes your perspective is the one that needs to change. You say, wow, they have a good point. I got that. I never thought about it that way. And then you can move on. But when you're afraid to hear an alternative viewpoint, you're in trouble as a person, as a human being, I think.
I totally agree. And I think where I'm at in the story process right now, in the bigger story, is I'm seeing two main stories that we navigate with. And with those two stories are two different points of view. So there's one is like what I would call the story that we have always been told. And in the story that we have always been told, the point of view that we have been sold is whatever. We can manufacture, compose our own story in any way we want, through our point of view, and ultimately we can decide for ourselves, each individual, what is right and what is wrong. That is what I would say is the story that we have always been told in our culture, in almost all facets of life. It reinforces this idea that you are the main point of view, each individual person, and you yourself can decide whatever you feel, big word, whatever you feel is right and wrong. And in a sense, even from infancy, we kind of needed to, for survival, we needed to adopt that point of view, is, from as an infant, a very young child, when you were tired, you cried. When you had a poopy diaper, you cried. When you were hungry, you cried. And so that's the beginning of our narrow point of view. It's around meeting our desires, meeting our needs. As we get older, it changes slightly, but it's more of the same. As a kindergartner, when that kid rips out my toy from my hand, I'm going to hit that thief because he took what was mine, or I can cry or run to the teacher. And so it's even from a young age, and some of it is necessary for survival, but at some point, are we going to change, or are we going to maintain that same narrow point of view of seeing the overall story only through our eyes? I know, you as a parent with your kids, as me as a parent, as my kids, one of the goals was to try and get our kids to not take that default main point of view of only seeing things through their eyes. We knew for their maturity and their development as human beings to avoid, diving into the waters of being a sociopath or a psychopath, or a narcissist. We know as parents that we have to resist that default program that is in every one of us. And we need to resist the desire to see things through our narrow point of view. That's one of the jobs as a parent. We're trying to teach our kids to see things through another point of view. It's not all just through your narrow point of view.
And also along those lines, it's saying, look, let the kid, they can write their story, guide them in their story, right? Teach them. But your story, you can't impose your story on them. And so many parents have written the story already for the kid. When they say, look, you're worthless, you can't do anything yourself, you can't, and they start the story off wrong.
Yep.
So I have people just yesterday, I have a lady, she's dealing with stuff from childhood. And it's just like, wow, that's really affected you because someone said something about you that you're dumb or you can't do certain things or you're ugly. And you believe those things no matter what happens in your life. And these false stories, these false narratives, as we say, it's like really hard. And we don't realize how much power our words, our perception of people has, right? When we judge people before we get to know them. I think that's a huge thing that people really need to know. And it's not all about you, and it's not all about getting a participation prize, right? There are people who win and people who lose, and life's not fair, and you make the best of it. And you go, okay, if it's not fair, I'm gonna do the best I can in an unfair world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's like we're swimming upstream and we're fighting this default program because our society, our culture, it keeps reinforcing, the story that we've always been told, reinforcing that idea of seeing things mainly through our point of view. If you think about even advertising, the very heart of advertising, the goal is to influence a person's point of view to buy their product, to convince you that you're cool if you have this. People will envy you if you have this, or even our social platforms, Facebook, all the different platforms. Boy, it's really easy to fall into the trap of trying to present ourselves a certain way, trying to influence what is right, what is wrong, trying to influence each of us into deciding what's cool, what looks good. I'm attractive if I do this. I'm not attractive if I'm this. And so even, the media, the social platforms, everything, it's like we're trying to resist and swim against the tide in the sense that everything in our culture is reinforcing the idea of we can determine what is right and wrong and trying to influence what we see as good and bad, right and wrong. And even, our politicians, our leaders are trying to appeal to us and what our desires are, what we feel is right and wrong. So we have all of this in our culture, and it's not just our culture, it's in every culture. And it's like this default program where the story that we've always been told is the story of you can make up your own story in any way you want through your main point of view, and you can decide what is good and bad. You can decide what is right and wrong. And maybe that's part of the sadness that I talked about is I'm old enough to see gradual drift in us as a people. I'm old enough I can see that we've drifted far away from where we were once going, and we're drifting further and further away. Someone who's only 10 years old, they have 10 years of experience. They may not be able to see that. Or maybe you have a very wise 10-year-old where even in their short life, they can see we're drifting in the wrong way. But here, I'm old enough where I can look back, decades and say, we're going the wrong way. Something's not
Yeah,
right.
and I
Something is
think I
broken.
think that's it. Like that's the sense we've had of this. When you say there's something quiet in the background that's not right. When I see the world one way, and I say, how does everyone else see it the other way? And I think a lot of us see it that really like in a church or like I do small groups for my practice. And so I know people are struggling with stuff and I'll ask them like, how come you didn't mention anything last night when we had the group meeting? They're like, I feel so inadequate because everyone else has their act together except me. Right. Then I talk to the next person. Yeah, I was the only one. I felt embarrassed because everyone else has their act together except me. And then the next person, then the next person. I think sometimes when you step back, and I think now we're seeing as a society say, well, I think we grew up in a time like, and I'm a little bit younger than you, even though I have more gray hairs. It's that we grew up in a time where we just went outside and played until dark. Like
Me
no
too.
one does that now. We've lost
Me
freedom in
too.
that we're afraid someone's going to come take the kids. We didn't even, that wasn't even on our mind. Like you'd hear us one story in a while, you go, wow, did you hear what happened in Atlanta? That's scary. We're
Yeah.
glad that doesn't happen here, but now it's happening everywhere. And as a society, we've looked at that and we looked at people saying, well, it's justified. I broke into this business because, I need the money. These are bad people that run the business. They don't look from the perspective of that person who's put everything into building that business and sacrificing and working all night and, trying to provide for their family. And you've just destroyed their ability to do that. Right. And for your cause. And so I think the more we step back and say, well, heck, don't you want to be loving your neighbors and being kind to them, even if you don't agree with them, even if they're a different religion or whatever it is? I think again we come back to this dehumanizing people and also just not having compassion and kindness towards them. And sometimes like that pastor returning evil with love and kindness, that there's something to that. And I think writing your own story for me as a non-believer growing up, the thing that bugged me about the Bible that I just couldn't get past, I was thinking, if these guys are writing this story, all these the disciples, like they all made themselves out looking like jerks. I go, if I was writing the story about me, I'd be the hero and say, I did everything right and I did it all right, right? That's our tendency. And I thought there has to be something to this. How does Paul, Saul to Paul, how does that happen? You're killing these guys and you go, okay, now I'm going to be their greatest leader. Think, how does that happen, right?
Yeah.
So you start seeing the bigger picture. He saw a bigger picture because he gave up everything to be in the hated crowd, right? People generally give up everything to be in the loved crowd. So that there's definitely stuff to that as there's bigger pictures. You step back and let your eyes focus on the big picture rather than just staring at that little part of it that you don't understand.
Exactly. And you just alluded to the bigger story. And, despite this sense of this sadness and even the fact that there's death, someone once said that every great story has death hovering over it. And I think there's some truth. It's just this sense of this hovering, something's not right. But despite all of that, there really is good news. There's another story. And so, yes, we have, the story that we've always been told. And yes, and the default point of view, main point of view is through our own eyes. We can determine what is right and wrong. But there's another story. There's another story. And this is God's story, and the sense that the other story is God's story and it's God's point of view. And we cannot hijack his story. We cannot hijack and wrestle the throne away and make the story through our main point of view. Why? Because that's not as the author intended. The author intends that we see life as it truly is, the truth, reality as it really is. And the fact that we dwell in a much bigger story than our small little tiny puny points of view. There's something so much bigger than that. And it's that, yes, we play a role, and maybe early on in our lives out of survival, we had to see things only through our point of view to make sense of life. But it's time for us to grow up, and it's time for us to mature and see life and reality as it truly is. And that is, we play roles in this story, but my story is not the story. It's a small story within the realm of a bigger epic story. And it's a God story. It's his point of view. And I can't hijack that. I can't make his story into my story. I can't take his point of view and make it my point of view. It's his story and it's his point of view that should guide us. And there's where I would argue that the best evidence of that, as far as being documented, is through the Bible and through scripture. I'm currently working on a book that I hope will be ready next year, a nonfiction book where I'm putting together some of the evidence of to back up that claim that yes, there really is a God, and compared to all other proposed scriptures and narratives of God, there is one that stands different than the others. And that's I'm hoping to have that out sometime next year and go through some of the evidences. But the listeners, I mean, you can investigate on your own and find out that, you know what, there's something different about this meta narrative. There's something different about the Bible. And why is it that throughout history, the powerful have always resisted this other story? Why is it the powerful fight this other story? Why is it that they try and ignore this other story? And that's the story I want to know. That's the story I want to know. Or when the powerful fight it, they fear it, they resist it, they try and ignore it. And I want to know that other story where the powerless seek it, they proclaim it, they are willing to die for it. I want to know that story. I want to know, when I look at our dark history in our country, as we've, as a country, we've done so many wonderful things, but there is a lot of darkness with our history. And in going back to our darkest chapter of slavery, why is it that slave masters resisted their slaves reading scripture? Why did they do that? Why did the slave masters resist and forbid their slaves reading the other story? Why is that? And why is it that heroes like Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, victims of oppression and persecution, why did they point to the other story as well? Why did they point to the other story as the solution? Why did they point to this other story and preach it and point to it and proclaim it? See, I want to know that story. and why do despots and dictators and tyrannical leaders throughout history, why do they resist this other story? What is in that story that they resist? Why is it that if I tried to read the other story, if I tried to read the Bible in communist countries or Marxist regimes, socialist regimes, tyrannical regimes, why is it that I would be killed? Why is it that proponents, the ones who bear the other story, why is it that they have to hide in many countries? Why do they have to have secret house churches? Why is that? See, that's the story I want to know.
Those are the questions, right? And I'll tell you, I've been to Vietnam, I've been to Cuba, I've been to countries where in Vietnam I couldn't talk to any patient without a government official translating. I couldn't have my own translators because they didn't want the word to get out. In Cuba, same thing. The churches are they go, if you have a Bible, you're going to go to prison, right? Right. That's kind of a crazy deal. Like in I'll tell you, in Vietnam, this impacted me greatly. If you tell stories, is buddy of mine, we're sitting having dinner with this pastor, really mild mannered, great guy, Vietnamese pastor, and my friend said, "Can you show the doctor your back?" And I go, "Oh, is your back hurting?" He goes, "Oh, let's go in the other room." We go in the other room. He takes off his shirt, and he had whip marks across his back, all across his back. And I said, well, "What happened?" He said, "Well, it's because I'm a Christian." I'm like, here in America, people don't go to church because it's raining, right? In Cuba, I watched these guys in church just sweating up in the balcony, sweating and praising God in the middle of where they couldn't be, right, preaching. So yeah, it's very, when you see those things, and he said, and he was the nicest guy on earth, and he said, yeah, my mom disappeared, my sister was killed, all that because we were Christian. I was like, what a sacrifice, what a price that he paid. What these people, and you look at that and we say, well, if I'm a Christian, people will not follow me on social media. I think I'll survive without that. I think I'll be okay. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that we don't realize. Again, America, we don't realize how good we have it, and we're like a dysfunctional family, but it's still a family, even if we're dysfunctional. So, I agree with you to the degree that we do have a dark past, but part of it is saying we've come out of that. And what lessons do we learn from that? And I think that's just like anything in life. We've had a bad chapter, and hopefully you can rewrite the next chapter. And a lot of us still have chapters to write. Don't let someone else write your book. You write your own book, right? And for me, it's relying on God. What's another story, just while we're talking here, I never heard this guy's story, and I'm like, ashamed that I haven't heard this story. His name is Nicholas Winton, right? This guy in Nazi Germany saved 669 kids, right? Putting his own life, his family, everything at risk because it was the right thing. And so there was a someone just put it on Twitter not too long ago. I saw the clip, and he was at this awards type thing, and he's sitting there, and they said, look, this lady, here's her story, and she was saved by this guy, and he didn't know the whole thing was about him, and like they cried and hugged each other. He saved her life when she was a little kid. Wow. And then the announcer said, hey, if anyone else was saved by this guy, can you please stand up? In the audience, and the entire audience stands up. Every single person's life there was saved by this guy. It was their grandkids and kids and all that. You're like, holy cow. I mean, one person's impact, right? And that's at the end of my story. I'm hoping that that's the end of the story. I go, man, this guy helped me. Like, Charlie's book helped me, when I needed it, and those things, and just being there and being kind and decent and not hating everyone. I think we've gotten to the point where, just we're surrounded by negativity everywhere. Absolutely. And just take 5 minutes and pray, 5 minutes and do yoga. I don't care. Just breathe and think about your story and what story you want to leave and what legacy you want to leave. And not just worry about what you get out of every relationship and how you get the new watch and the new car and all those things. Because, it's just amazing what I've seen of people who just say, you know what, the happiest people, the happiest stories I see are those who sacrifice and help others. I don't see happy stories on people who have the biggest cars and the biggest houses and the best things. And in Vietnam, that was another message. I would be driving in these shacks everywhere. And I think, do you think these guys really cared about the Vietnam War? Like, they're out on their rice paddy. They don't really care who their government is. They just want to live their life and have their kids and live. And then I went to a remote village, and we were on this little boat, and I was going through the dense jungle, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, it was a heavy moment for me, because I was thinking, just imagine if someone shot at you, you'd have no idea where it's coming from. These guys that died, like your uncle in Vietnam, you think, wow, like, you didn't know who the enemy was. You didn't know. And I think, I think in our society is, in war, historically, it's been, you see those guys, they're in a different uniform and you're fighting against them. But then you get into Afghanistan, you have no idea who wants to kill you and who doesn't. They're all, and I think that's part of the story we're in. We don't know who's good, who's bad, who's going to, and so that's the hard thing, because there's no sign on someone's head. They could be attractive, they could be all these things, and they could be out to get you, right? That's the hard thing in life. And so I think that's a big story too, of saying, you don't always know who the good, in the book, who the good guys and the bad guys are, right? It's set out for you, and you get it for the most part, unless it's a genius book where they twist it at the end, right? So yeah, so in your in your experience in life, I mean, what's the rest of the story?
Yeah. So I think knowing that there is another story, and knowing that there's a reason why there is resistance to the other story, and it's because it's the other story asks us to adopt a different point of view. So that's kind of where I'm at, is what does that look like? What does it look like to adopt a different point of view than the default point of view that I have been taught through our culture? And so now I try and evaluate all the competing stories, all the competing narratives, and I try and ask myself, like 5 questions in this story that I am now evaluating. Who is the main point of view in this story? Who is the main protagonist in this story? Who is the main antagonist? What is the resolution of this story? And what is the main message of the story? So that's where I'm in that time in my story, and trying to evaluate every narrative, every story that comes my way. When a leader is trying to proclaim a certain way of thinking, when I'm watching a movie, reading a book, I'm trying to ask those questions. Okay, in this proposed story, who is the main point of view? Who's the main protagonist? Who's the main antagonist in this story? What is the main resolution? What is the message of this story? So then I can try and compare, and do I have the right point of view? When I have that argument with my wife, and if I'm honest and assessing what happened, maybe I compose that story and that event through my limited point of view. Maybe I put myself as the protagonist, and I made my wife the antagonist, you know, and so now let's flip that. Let's see through a different perspective. Let's take away the narrow blinders that I was living. Let's take the perspective of the author and his story itself. And then through his point of view, in that interaction that I had, God is supposed to be the main point of view. It's through his point of view. It's his story. I can't hijack his story and point of view. So it's his point of view. Who is the main protagonist? It's God. It's not me. In that argument, I'm not supposed to be the protagonist. You know, it's God. It's his story. It's his point of view. He's the protagonist. And who's the antagonist in the story? It's not my wife. If anything, I was the antagonist in God's story. I was the one resisting God's point of view and his desire. And so to realize that, yes, we have an adversary. There is a Satan that works in our lives and tries to take our focus away from it's God's story. It's his point of view. It's his resolution to the story. It's his message. And the challenging patience that I'm sure you've had challenging personalities. I've had challenging personalities. And when I take it out of my narrow point of view, it's not about me. It's not my story. I'm not the protagonist in the story. My patient is not the antagonist in the story. No, I got to look through God's point of view, and it's God's story, and he's the protagonist. And why am I acting like an antagonist to what God wants to do? I need to change the point of view and see through God's perspective. So I think that's where I'm hoping to continue to learn in my story, is to learn and to live out that it's not my story. I can't hijack the bigger overall picture. I can't hijack God's story and make it truly my own, or my own narrow point of view. I'm going to have much greater success as I live through his point of view. And then I can find my role in the overall bigger epic story. So
Yeah, and I think that's
where
I
I'm
mean,
living.
while you're speaking, my brain's working because I'm thinking all these people who are the protagonists of this epic story over all these years died, and the story still went on. It still went on, right? It
There you
still
go.
goes on without you. And
Yep.
so I think sometimes realizing it's not all about you. I mean, that's something that all of us have to think about. It's like, for a lot of times we step back and go, what's the bigger picture? And I think if more of us thought that way, then the world would be a lot better place. Like, it's not just about us getting ours and getting what we need and everyone takes care of me. I mean, sometimes just taking care of someone. And you know, like you were saying about the stages of growing up, at some point when we have kids, you look and like, wow, I have a lot of responsibility now. It's not just me doing stupid things. Now all of a sudden I have other people that I have to take care of, right? And when you get married, you start realizing, and then when you have grandkids, you have a responsibility, and all these things that we realize that our story will impact other stories, you know, right, around us and our circle and our sometimes we worry so much about stuff that we'll never influence. Like we hate certain presidents. It's like they'll never know who we are. They don't know our story. They don't know anything about us. We just, you know, so those things I hate to give that kind of energy out for the most part, because it's just I'm not going to accomplish anything. I think we say, where can I make an impact? And let me step into that story. So a lot of people are listening, go, what is my story? And where am I at? Like, who are you? So I ask people, what do you do for fun? And they look at me like, fun? Like they don't have fun. Like you enjoy your life. Go out and do something, write, go and write, read,
Yeah, yeah.
do something that is productive, that where you come out a better person. So Charlie, I got to ask you, man, since this podcast is called Life's Best Medicine, if I say, hey, man, you're on your deathbed and you want to give good information out to people, what would you tell people matters? Like if someone's saying, hey, old man, what matters?
Yeah, just it's a good summary um, of hopefully what we talked about is just I would tell that person, as I'm telling myself, get your story straight, you know, and get your story straight. And it's not your story, it's not my story. And ultimately, it's God's story, and we dwell in his story. But it's his story. It's not mine, it's not yours.
And his story is history, right?
Exactly, his
Yeah.
story, exactly. And live according to that. And then that's when you truly find out who you are, how you were made. How did the author and creator knit and weave you a certain way? And his desire is to surface those qualities that he is knitted into us, into our DNA, and to tell our story. We're not robots, we're all made differently, and we're not just blindly made just to follow the creator of all these robots. No, it's this wonderful father who's created us in his image to live out his story through you, through the gifts and and what he has knitted in you, to surface that, to find your purpose in the story is serving the author of your story. And so I guess that's what I would try and say on my deathbed is that's the key to actually finding out who you are, who I am in this story, is to acknowledge there is a bigger epic story, way bigger than my own little, narrow viewed story. And it points to the author of my faith. It points to the creator of this bigger epic story that I dwell in. So just to kind of think bigger than what we've been thinking, basically.
Awesome, man. I know you're a deep thinker. Obviously, that comes across here. And then, how do people get in touch with you if they want to listen to to go onto your
Yeah,
blog and
yeah,
grab your books?
yeah. I would point everyone to the website. So charlesanthonysolorio.com. charlesanthonysolorio.com. And I would encourage people, go to the blog. If any of what I brought up, what I'm learning in this story, in this journey, if any of this resonated, go to the blog, start off with the blog. And right now there's 10 entries, 10 chapters. Start with the first chapter and at least read the first 5 chapters. And you can kind of see, much of what I brought up in this podcast episode. And I would say start there, go to the website. You can contact me through the website, and just start with the blog and see if those first 5 entries, especially, if that resonates with you, if that can influence you, or maybe I want my ideas challenged, because ultimately the truth is going to surface. Eventually, no matter what happens, eventually the truth of any matter will surface. And I want to know if I'm off somewhere. I want that challenged, and I want people to challenge me so that the truth does eventually surface. Why? Because this isn't my story. Ultimately, this is not my story, and I want to be obedient to the greater story and the author of our story. So I'd probably say that's probably the best way. Go on the website, and then you can contact me there, or just start with the blog, first few chapters, see where that takes you.
All right, awesome. And you requested that you would like to close us in prayer. I kind of joke with that on my other podcast, but I would love that, man. If you
Okay.
want to say a prayer for people out there who really um, maybe have been touched by what you're talking about, or it has at least made them think a little bit. So I would love to
Absolutely.
give you that honor.
Hey, I appreciate that. Ah, Lord Jesus, I thank you for this opportunity. Um, uh, we are all students in life, and we're all in different places. And my prayer is that we can see ourselves in the greater story, in the grand epic story that is far beyond what our limited points of view and perspective can inform us of. Lord, we have, in all our attempts to kind of try and fix our stories, we try and fill the emptiness within us with so many different things and ideas, and we are lost. We're broken. Uh, but there is another story. There's another story to live, seeing life through your eyes. Help us to see our circumstances through your eyes. In our limited view, our circumstances may be horrible, but maybe if you can give us a glimpse of seeing our present circumstances through your point of view, and maybe this is just a part of the story where we're walking through dark times, but there's victory in the next few pages. Help us to see our present circumstances and see through your point of view what they mean and how we will grow from those things. Give us the eyes to see who we truly are, and through your eyes, not our limited vision. Teach us to see our loved ones and those who we call enemy. I pray that you would give us your point of view, your perspective on our loved ones and how they are in your eyes. And even those that we have called enemies, I pray that you would open our eyes to see them as a brother and a sister, and seek revelation from our Father to help us with our relationships with our brothers and sisters. Help us to view our past, our present, and our future through your perspective, not in our limited perspective. It's your story. Teach us to not attempt futilely to hijack your story and your point of view and make it our own. It is worthless to do that. Teach us that it's through you. It's all about you. It's been about you all along. Teach us to see that it's Jesus, the perspective of seeing life through the eyes of God and Jesus, and any other competitor. They don't match up. It's always Jesus versus fill in the blank. Teach us that the abundant life is seeing life through Jesus, and fill in the blank, it doesn't work. It's always through God's perspective, through your perspective. God, teach us that is where the fruit of life is. That is the abundant life. That is what we were designed for. That is, you are the author. Teach us your way. Teach us your ways, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Hey, man, thank you. Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening. I know we went a little long, but I think this is important stuff. And so be kind to yourself, be kind to others. And I hope this triggers some thoughts and hopefully some action. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.